So here's an introduction to taxes as shown in chapter 8. So in the book you have figure 3, and we'll kind of show where figure 3 comes from. So this is kind of a recap of what we've done so far. So here we have our downward sloping demand curve, our upward sloping supply curve. And where these two intersect, that's our equilibrium price, P star, and quantity, Q star. But what a tax does, a tax drives a wedge between the price that the buyer pays and the price that the seller receives. So think about this as when you pay and you buy a $1 hamburger, you pay $1. That's how much you pay. Without any taxes, the seller receives that $1, and that's how much it's theirs, or costs the hamburger to them, and so that's equilibrium. But when we add taxes such as a sales tax, you pay $1.06, that dollar plus the 6 cents in sales tax, but the receiver, while they take $1.06 off your hands, 6 cents of that goes to the government and they only keep $1. So that tax drives a wedge between the price that the buyer pays and the price the receiver receives. And so let's draw that wedge. So I'm going to draw it right here. And that wedge that we're talking about is this difference, this point here and this point here. That this point, this is the price that the buyer pays. The buyer pays the higher price. This is the size of the tax, and so this distance here is the price that the seller receives. Now I drew it large in this case to show the point on the graph, but when you think of this is you pay $1.06 for your hamburger, 6 cents goes to the government, that's the size of the tax, the difference between these two lines, these 2 points, and then the seller receives $1 from that. All right, so that's what we talk about, this wedge being driven between the two. And what happens now is this changes things, because now here's the quantity that's received, that's sold under taxes. So the first thing to note is that under a system with taxes, the optimal quantity decreases. The market provides less of these goods. The other thing to note is that the price that the buyers pay is higher than the equilibrium price, and the price that the sellers receive is less than the equilibrium price. So let's go ahead and label these points, or these different areas. So first we have this upper triangle right here. So let's see if we have some highlighters. So we have this triangle right here. Now this triangle represents the amount the buyers are willing to pay minus the price they actually have to pay. So we'll call this triangle A, and triangle A represents consumer surplus. Some consumers be willing to spend a lot for the good, but they only have to pay the little. This triangle down here at the bottom, we'll call this triangle F, just to keep consistent with the book. This is producer surplus. There are some producers who have a low cost to provide the good, but they receive a price above that. And so when we look at this, what we notice is that our total surplus has decreased dramatically. That consumer surplus used to be this big triangle here, and now it's just this little triangle up top. Producer surplus used to be this big triangle right here, and now it's just this little one at the bottom. So now we want to ask, what are these different areas here? Well, this area here, this whole area, is represented by the size. Remember, this distance right here, if we draw this out, this is the size of the tax. And then the horizontal distance is the quantity. So this whole area here represents the tax revenue that the government receives. We'll call this top portion right here B, and that's the portion that's coming from the consumer. Because before the consumer was paying this lower price, and now they're paying the higher price, this part right here, we'll call this part D. That's the amount of tax revenue coming from the producer. But now we're left with these two triangles. And this overall larger triangle right here, Remember, these are individuals right here who are willing to pay a higher price than the equilibrium price. These are producers willing to supply it at a price below equilibrium price, so they would want to make that exchange because producers would be selling at a higher or lower, because there you have a willingness to pay greater than the willingness to sell. But they can't engage in this because of the tax. It means that if this is the price the buyer pays, the price that the consumer producer would receive would be way down here. And so that no longer happens. So this triangle right here, both of these together, is called the dead weight loss. That's the loss of efficiency. Part of it, this upper part, triangle C, is dead weight loss caused by or coming from the consumer. And this bottom triangle is E, which comes from the producer. And so what we have with the tax is not only do we have lower quantity, a higher price to buyers, a lower price to sellers, but now we have deadweight loss. We have inefficiency. So when we talk about taxes, oftentimes we're talking about they are inefficient in the market.